Okay, so we're actually going to go into this next section of research. So if you look here, there are three types of research methods, and this actually you could continue. Not sure. Well, actually, what I would like for you to do is either you could put a line because I know you guys don't have a lot of notes per se on the intro to research. If you want to start on a new page, putting video notes, the three types of research methods you can, or just make a line and just know that three types of research methods as your topic, like your big topic. And then we're going to start with number one. So on the margin, you may want to write number one, descriptive, and then we're going to go from there. So, we're going to first talk about descriptive, the research methods that are used. This is typically the order that when they're in psychology, this is typically what they do. They'll start with descriptive, then they'll move to correlation, and then finally experimental. Okay, and reason being is we're going to go from cheapest and the one that you could get the most information from to all the way to the most expensive and a lot more detailed, which is the experimental. Okay, so we're going to start kind of here. This is where descriptive research starts. Okay, and we're going to start with how do they collect data? How do they collect information? And there's different ways of collecting data. So you're going to want to write like a little subtopic of collecting ways of collecting data, okay, under descriptive. And the first one is going to be naturalistic observation. These are the three they use, but you're just going to write naturalistic observation, okay? And then in after that, we're going to do a bullets for just what is naturalistic observation, okay? Now, write what I say, okay? And this is basically where they're going to record behavior in natural environments, okay? That's the first thing, where they're going to observe and record behaviors in natural environment, okay? Next bullet under that is that there is no interference from the researcher. Okay, so the researcher does not interfere with the participants. Okay, next thing is that it allows for the researcher to see someone's natural behavior of how like people behave. So like for instance, if I had, a camera in your house, right? And there's a camera in the classroom, your behaviors are going to be totally different, right? The way that you naturally behave at home as opposed to how you naturally behave in the classroom, right? And I would say a camera because you wouldn't know, right, that they are observing you. Because the minute you know somebody's observing you, right, your behavior is going to automatically change. Now, this naturalistic observation works really well, usually with smaller children. Usually you'll see, like they're in a room and there's like a glass that they think it's a mirror, and then there's people on the other side watching them. Okay, when we look at the clown, why we have the clown in the classroom, one of them is due to this research that they did of the bozo clown, of how kids would play with a doll after observing an adult playing with it aggressively. They did it naturalistic observation in the sense of the kids didn't know that they were being observed, right? They just let them in this play room and then they just played, right? This is when another example can be that when kids are in the playground, right? And you see them playing and you're collecting data to see their behaviors, okay? This is great because you really do see how the person's going to act in a natural environment. People that study animals, right? Obviously, they do a lot of observational, naturalistic observation to see them, the animals, in their natural habitat. Okay, so this is that famous chimpanzee, forgot her name. Anyway, but these are all naturalistics. Now, we're going to go into depth in class of what are the strengths and weaknesses of that. Okay, so I really don't want to get into that right now with this one. So, but this is a little um idea that obviously it's the strength is that you get to see people's natural behaviors in their natural environment. Okay, but we'll talk more about that in class. Now, the next one we're going to talk about the second type of descriptive research method is case studies. So this will be your subtopic case studies, okay? And this is basically a case study is when they examine an one individual, okay, or a small group of people that have a common characteristic or that share common characteristics, okay? So it's usually case studies are either one person, okay, or it could be a small group of people with specific characteristics, like they all have the specific characteristics, okay. So now next bullet for this one is that a case study also, it's an in-depth look into an individual. Okay, so it's very, very detailed. They basically follow this person around. They give you basically all the information about this one person. Okay, usually another bullet for case studies is that it's usually done for people with uncommon characteristics in society. Okay, so it's typically not like, hey, a random, high school student at Moss, right? Like that would not be a case study per se. It's usually a person. If they do an individual, it's usually a person or small group that have really distinct and special characteristics that are not very common. Okay. So the good thing about this, it's very detailed, very, very detailed. But the bad thing is that it cannot be generalized, right? And usually it cannot be replicated because these are really uncommon characteristics or features or whatnot that a person may have. Okay. So for instance, see, it keeps on going back. This little screen thing, not sure what's going on. Okay, anyway, um, but a case study, and I'll show you these two very, very famous case studies in psychology, in psychology, which you have Phineas Gage and then you have Jeannie. Well, Phineas Gage, okay, was basically this man that he worked in the 1800s, I think it was. He was working in a railroad, and one of the metal rods went through his eye socket, right? And went out through his brain, right? Got stuck there. He lived. But once after the accident, they saw and they did research, a case study on him because his behavior changed so drastically and his personality. So then they started doing more research, right? From this one guy with a distinct, characteristic, then to see, okay, well, what's going on in that part of the brain that has affected his personality and his behavior so much. He turned like really aggressive. He started, speaking, like saying a lot of bad words. Just his characteristics, like not characteristics, sorry, his personality just completely changed. Right? It wasn't the people around him saw a huge difference. So then this case study led to even more research. And then Jeannie, see again. Okay, another case study is Jeannie's case study, in which this young girl, her father actually, when she was about 20 months, like almost 2 years old, they locked her in her room and basically kept her there. And she didn't learn she wasn't exposed to anybody speaking to her. So no language, nothing. So when they finally found her, when she was finally 13 years old, she basically she couldn't speak at all. She was like, like an animal, like just grunts and stuff. And then why her study is so important is because it actually taught us about language and how language does have a critical period that you have to learn it between a certain time. If not, you won't master it. Okay, so though these case studies aren't exactly, you cannot replicate it, right? You cannot have these cases again, but they definitely do open the doors to more information about, about the human being. Okay. All right. So then the other way that descriptive researchers collect information is through surveys. Now, surveys are going to be the fastest way to collect data. And many times it is basically like the cheapest, right? It's cheap, it's fast. But I could give it to a lot more people to collect this information, right? And it's basically just questionnaire with a bunch of questions. I'm going to actually give you a worksheet in class that's going to give you different types of surveys that are out there. Okay, so because you do need to know some of the differences and obviously some of the negative with this. Okay, and as we've talked about is like surveys, and remember those questionnaires I was asking you with the highs and lows activity we did in class, those were survey questions, right? And what did we discuss? Which was basically people are going to lie about some of their choices, and you're going to see why. So, what I did talk about some of the strength, even though we're going to talk about it in school, is basically one of the good things about this is that you can get a lot of information in one short amount of time, as well as it's a low cost, especially now with technology. Okay, you could also randomly sample, right? Get a large sample size from the population, which is great because then you could generalize it. Okay. And the bad thing about it is two things. There's this thing called wording effect, and you definitely need to have that in your notes. Wording effect is basically that depending on how they word, so the way the question is framed, it can have a major effect. So please write that down. So the way the question is framed can have a major effect, right? And it could change the results of the survey. So many times, like, I'll give you one question and we'll do a little example on wording effect as well in the class. But should you be concerned with, like, if I tell you, here's the question, should animal owners be concerned with their animals by giving them vaccines, okay, or vaccinating their animals? Now, the minute I use the word concerned, it's going to alter the way that people see that, because many times when I use or people use specific words, it lends itself to, well, if you're concerned, then you're going to want your animal to be healthy. So if you want your animal to be healthy, you're going to want to vaccinate the animals, okay, or the animal, the dog, whatever, okay, to keep it safe. Now, another problem with surveys is this idea of social desirability effect, and we talked about this. You're going to want to write this word down, and it is basically that people want to look, so like they want others to socially accept them, right? So they're going to make themselves look good. And we do this all unconsciously. We want others to accept us, basically. We want to be part of the pack, which is a normal thing. Okay. Now, the last thing on this little section is I do want you to remove this from the descriptive side. This is going to be its own subtopic, and this is longitudinal and cross-sectional studies. Okay, you'll have that there. And these are ways that they gather and they like the studies, how they design these studies. Okay, now the first one, and you may want to put number one, longitudinal study, is when they follow the same group of people, okay? So they're going to follow this same group of people or person. It could be one person, like a case study, long term. And it's exactly what it says, longitudinal study. It is a study that they study for a long time. And here it is again, changing 1 second. Okay, so they're going to follow this group of people for a long period of time. For example, which there is a study of a longitudinal study of what happens when you give a child in elementary Ritalin and what is the long term effect, right? So they obviously cannot just get a kid that gets it, starts in elementary and they have to follow him all the way to, let's say, their college careers. So that will be a long period of time that they're going to follow the same people. Problem with that is, and there's some negatives, and you need to know this, is that people drop out, right? So people could drop out. And the minute you drop out of that study, if they've been studying you for 20 years, let's say, and in 10 years, 10 years pass by, and you're like, you know what? I don't want to be in part of the study anymore. Then all of that data is gone. Okay. They can't use that subject's information. Another thing, it's really expensive. If I'm following people for 20 years, it's a long time to be collecting data and, maintaining that payment there. So it's very expensive. And then a lot of times the subjects don't last, right? They can pass away too. So that's another thing with that. Okay. But it is extremely detailed. So here are the pros. It's extremely detailed. You know a lot of the variables of each person's life. So you could see how one thing can affect the other. Okay. Now, the other one, which is the cross-sectional studies, that's number two, in which they will get, and it's cross sectional because they're going to cross section from the population, which basically means they're going to pick people from different age groups, right? And they're going to study that person, right? So let's say it's the same study of how does Ritalin affect a child's success in the future, let's say. What they will do is they'll get children in elementary, they'll get children in middle school, in high school, in college, others that have their career. Like they'll get from different age groups, and then they will study them all at the same time and then come up with the conclusion. Okay. The good thing about a cross sectional study is that you can basically collect, it's like the collection of data is a lot faster and cheaper because you're getting the information right now. I'm not waiting for this 5-year-old kid that I have here. I'm not going to wait for him for 20 years to see what happens to him, right? That'll be a longitudinal study, but I want the information now. I'll do a cross sectional. So they'll get these different people from different age groups and then test them on that, right? So obviously all of these participants have to have similar characteristics, right? They took medication when they were younger and now here they are, 20 is still, older, right? But anyway, I digress. So what ends up happening is that they will test them out and then come to a conclusion. The problem with this cross-sectional study is that there are way too many variables, right, in the person's life. Like we don't know what happened to those other, like the participants that are like in their 20s or 30s or 50s, 60s. We don't know what life was before. We just know right now they're going to test them on this particular thing, and we don't know if it's due to, let's say, the medication, right, that they're successful or not successful. So there's way too many variables when it comes to a cross-sectional study. Okay, and that's basically it for descriptive.